Good afternoon, and welcome back to the third webinar in our series of teaching ESL, ELL in multi-level classrooms. My name is Brenda Huey Rosas, and I am the ESL specialist from Thesys International. I have a bachelor's degree in Chinese and a master's in English, teaching English to speakers of other languages, TESOL. I also have over 10 years of experience in teaching ESL in multi-level classrooms. I once had a classroom where I taught 39 students, 5th through 12th grade, all different levels, all at the same time. That was one of the craziest experiences of my life, but the best learning experience. For the first webinar, I spoke about multi-level classrooms and why you might choose a multi-level classroom over single-level classrooms for your ESL programs. Last webinar, we talked about schema building and the different activities you can do to build background for your students before teaching a topic. Today's webinar is about vocabulary practice for ESL, ELL classrooms and activities that promote participation, which is my favorite topic. Let's get started. Vocabulary should always be taught in context and never as isolated word lists. In this image, you can see the list of S words: sign, scissors, statue, stockings. A lot of teachers like to give out word lists. There's nothing wrong with word lists, but sometimes word lists that just start with the same letter can be confusing for the students, and then they revert to memorizing. Another word list may be words that all are about my home. Even though they don't start with the same letter and they are theme-based, they still may get confused and call a chair a couch, or a television a video. So the idea here is that when you use word lists, you need to have some kind of context to teach that word list with that. So we do believe in thematic. We always want to be teaching vocabulary in thematic contexts. For example, you can see in this image, you have an island, a statue. This is all about the Statue of Liberty. And the idea here is that we also teach them image-based, but to a specific theme. So when your word list is thematic about the Statue of Liberty, we still have a reading that may go with it, images that go with it, audio files, a lot of different items to make it in some sort of context. We also believe in academic vocabulary. So academic vocabulary is really what will help teachers present students with vocabulary that they will use in their science classes, their history classes, their health classes, English classes later on. The idea here is they're learning academic vocabulary in their classrooms for ESL, practicing them so that later when they see them, they'll know those words already. Because most of the time, those words aren't bolded anymore in their textbooks. And we also believe that students should learn in an explicit way. So one of the worst examples of learning vocabulary is what my students love to do. They have their TOEFL books. TOEFL books are, just a word list of words that start with the letter A, and they just keep going, and they're all difficult and they're all new. No images, just the word and their definitions in English. So they sometimes don't even understand the definitions. And what students do is they sit there and they memorize the word, they memorize the definition, and then they can try to recall it. But they really don't know how to use these words. They don't know what to do with them, and when they see them again, they may not even know them. And the worst part is these students in my classrooms, they would be doing this study while I was teaching or while I was doing something with them that was more useful. But because they really believed in memorizing word lists, we had this little bit of a push and pull effect here where we really tried to teach them the way we believed it should be taught, but still they wanted to learn the way they wanted to. But our belief is that vocabulary should always be taught explicitly with a certain flow, which is what I'm going to share with you now. So for example, vocabulary should have a flow where you first have vocabulary preview. You then have, of course, presentation. That's where the teacher comes in and teaches the vocabulary. Then, of course, practice. I wanted to give you some examples here of great activities that we've tried in our multi-level classrooms, single-level classrooms that we love, the students love, so the students can get excited about practicing vocabulary. But most importantly, they'll remember it and not just memorize the words. Then writing, and then assessment. Okay. So for vocabulary preview, I like to always start off with, like we talked about, a word list, but again, just not the word list because we're going to do so much with that word list. The words really start from the reading you're going to cover. So remember we talked about background schema. You build that schema building for that topic. Then those words come out of that topic, that reading, so that's how you get your list. So the list you can give to the students on paper works just fine. Digitally, but either way, we want them to highlight the words they don't know. So, as a teacher, it's very important to me to know which words from this list my students have no clue about. There may be some words on this list that they already know, which is great, but I can't ask each student individually which words they don't know. So what happens first is I give them a list, they highlight the words they don't know, and then I can walk around and instantly see what words they don't know, what words I'm going to need to do a little bit more work explaining and covering. Another way is in Quizlet, which I will show you shortly, but there is a way to star the words. So maybe they star the words they don't know, or maybe they star the words they do know. But either way, when you're a teacher walking around, you can get a great idea of which words you need to cover. All right, so another way I like to preview vocabulary with my students is presenting them with this chart. There's really no name for this chart, but the idea here is that there are different words that are put in these charts by the students to really show their level of understanding. So for example, in the yellow box, you could see words I know. So from the list, they're going to put the words they know. These are the words that maybe they've seen, they've heard about, but they don't really know what to do with, okay? So they've recognized it. So words they know, they could put in that box. In the orange box, words I can define. This is a second level of understanding. They can now give a definition in their own words, probably not a definition they memorized, maybe it was, but the idea is they can make a definition with this word. And then lastly, we have the blue box, words I can use in a sentence. So these are the words that they know so well that they can explain it and put it into a new context. And in that way, it shows their level of understanding, also mixing a little bit of critical thinking. Later in this webinar, we're going to do a lot with sentence making. All right, so the idea here is the students put the words in. They've done their second touch with these words, but most importantly, again, the teacher can now assess which words the students really have no clue about and which ones they really do know and may not need to spend a lot of time on. All right. So moving on to vocabulary presentation. We believe teachers are very integral in the process of learning vocabulary as well as learning in general. So for vocabulary presentation, again, you can give it to them as a paper. Make a PowerPoint. So on the PowerPoint, you might have, just the word or some definitions or, your PDF, iBook, or even flashcards. So all these items, it's important. We'll cover each one again, but the idea is that you need to have the word, a definition in easy English. The problem with sometimes when we make definitions is we open up the dictionary, we copy the definition, and the students don't understand the definition. So kind of what's the point of the definition when they have to look up the definition for the word? So when we make these PowerPoints, when we make these PDFs or iBooks, iBooks are great. I'll explain a little bit more, but we really need to be careful about the words we choose when we make a definition. Going back to the iBooks, I really love creating iBooks for students. The reason is if you have access to an iPad or Mac technology, students are able to double tap a word, see the definition you've created, but more importantly, see the definition that they can create in their own language. So for example, if they double tap, they can type in their world language, Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, but they can type their definition and in that way later recall it and see it, but they really can read it in their own language. We do believe here a lot in using their first language when learning a second language, but we don't believe in total translation and bilingual education as much here because, of course, our classes are mixed with different speakers of different languages. So going back to flashcards and paper and any way you present the vocabulary, it's best to present the word first, of course, the definition, we talked about that, but the part of speech. Students may see a word, they don't know if it's a noun, verb, adjective, adverb, and remember, words have different forms. So the idea here, like you see celebrate, celebrate's a verb, celebration's a noun. celebratory. So the idea here is that you can also not just teach the parts of speech, but also the other word forms that go with that word. Sample sentences are probably the most important to cover. In that way, you are using the word in an example and putting it in a context that they can then understand how to use the word. So sometimes when they understand a word, they also have to understand sentence structure and how that word fits into sentence structure. So a sample sentence is very useful. Word study might also be another extension of learning a vocabulary word. So synonyms, antonyms, if there are homonyms or homophones, and then also maybe prefixes and suffixes. You can expand vocabulary presentation as much or as little as you prefer. But the idea here is at least the word, definition, part of speech, and sample sentence, maybe even an image. All right. So one way we really like to present vocabulary to students and have them practice it is through Quizlet. Quizlet is an application that teachers can create their own word lists and thus their study modes. I'm going to go into Eloquence just as an example where you can see Quizlet and how we've embedded it into the program. Here you can see when I click, there is a complete word list. This is something that's digital but also can be printed out for the students. You can see here the words and their definitions. On our iBook PDFs, we also put the parts of speech, a sample sentence, and an audio of how it sounds like. Here you can see different ways that you can print this out. You could see a glossary type format, but more importantly, you can actually make flashcards for the students and have those printed, or make single flashcards. This is important because we are going to talk about a few games that use flashcards, so you just press print, cut them out, and you're done. So the idea here is that Quizlet is very useful when you want to teach students with word lists. But what we love about it is the practice capability. So here you have the word, you have the audio, it'll say celebrate, and again, remember going back to preview and how you could star the words. But more importantly here, you click to flip, you see the definition, and then the study modes. So for example, scatter is a way that students can, play a game and kind of race against each other or themselves and try to match the words with the definition. When that happens, it disappears. And so the idea here is that you are trying to race the clock and make everything disappear. We then have learn. Learn is the definition, and then you can then type in the words. So maybe international. Test. I really like test because it is practice. It's not high stakes. The students don't feel a lot of pressure to do this. They can put in the the word for the definition. They can also do multiple choice. And then also true and false. And then they can check answers. So they'll get a grade, but also feedback on what was correct and incorrect and the correct answer for that. So this is very useful for them to do self-study. Flashcards are what we started with. And then Space Race. Space Race is another game. It's timed. The definition is moving across, and then students need to type in the words. All right. And lastly, there's Speller. So the students hear the word, and then they will type out the word. All right. So that is Quizlet. Again, very useful for introducing the words and practicing them. The only difficulty is it really only has them do words, spelling, and definitions, and we really want them to extend that into a new context of how to use the words. So we're going to talk a lot about different games you can play to extend vocabulary practice. The first one is about images. So picture this is a great game. I hope that you can try this in your classrooms and have the same experience that we've had with the students. They love this game. They are basically creating a slide deck with images, and it's like a pre-made Pictionary. So if you have, a few pieces of technology students can share, or you can have them all do it individually. They have their word list, and then they choose words such as, for example, if the word's airplane, they can find images of an airplane online and then put it on their slide deck. They're not going to put the word. They'll put the word on the next slide or just tell the class the word. But the idea is they pre-make their slide deck, and then they could turn it into the teacher pulls it up, the student goes up and then tests the students on that, or tries to get them to say it to make points. A lot of different ways. If you have Chromebooks or iPads, you could just walk around and have them, look at it and then ask them and have them to guess. So the idea here is it's really just image-based, recalling the vocabulary, because the more times they recall and practice, they'll remember it later on. All right. Another extension is word study. So we talked about synonyms and antonyms. A good word for it is a game built off of basically a graphic organizer. So you can make a complete graphic organizer of just synonyms or just antonyms, or you can mix it. So for example, you see this graphic organizer, beautiful. The first step would be to have them find these words, obviously. So for example, beautiful, pretty. A word we can think of is gorgeous and maybe attractive. Ugly, hideous, and maybe unattractive. And so I filled out my graphic organizer. Now, here's a caution. A lot of teachers say, yes, go look into the dictionary, your thesaurus, and find the antonyms and synonyms. And that is a great practice, but sometimes students don't know which words work and which ones don't. There are plenty of words that may be synonyms or antonyms, but don't actually work in the same context of this word. So teachers do really need to help students figure out which words are good antonyms or good synonyms for the words. And then maybe in groups it might be a little easier to recall some of these words. But once they make this graphic organizer, teachers would then go around and ask a student to share, and they would then get points. Or out of a hat, a teacher, not a hat, but they could choose a word such as beautiful, and then a student has to, on the spot, say what the synonym and antonym is. So there is a sentence frame for this. So it would be a good synonym for beautiful is pretty. And in that way, students follow this sentence frame and can do synonyms and antonyms. All right. So moving on, we have word families. This is about categorizing words, putting them in categories. This is actually taken from one of our teachers that uses eloquence, and he really loves this game and has taught other teachers to use this game. And the idea here is, again, you have your word list, and you are taking these words and trying to categorize them, finding similarities. So for example, here you can see that I put transportation as a category under that: airplane, train, and tour bus. So category words for up in the air, maybe airplane. Let's see, fly, as well as high. So here you can see those are words for up in the air. So maybe I have a blank one that I need to make a category for. So I might think something like travel. So I could again take airplane, and I could travel by flying. I could travel by train. I could travel by tour bus. And maybe I even need my luggage. But the idea here is you can put all these words, use them twice, 3 times. It really doesn't matter. Students can do it on paper or on a graphic organizer digitally. But then ultimately you want to bring them to the board. So whether you're projecting their PowerPoint or you're having them draw their categories and then writing the words in and then labeling it, they are then presenting the categories and then really have them justify why these words fit into these categories. And also, as an extension, something to make it a little bit harder, you can actually have students just put the words up and then have the next team try to guess what that category is, so to try to see the similarities. In this way, you really see if students are really understanding the vocabulary, but more importantly, they're starting to categorize words. All right. Moving on, race for sentences. This is one of my favorite games, and the reason for this is teachers don't have to prepare anything. So you already have your word list, right? And you have your students in front of you. All you do is partner them up and give them a piece of blank paper. So they have their word list and their blank paper. The teacher goes up to the front. He or she is waiting for students to create sentences. So it's a race. Students need to create sentences with the vocabulary words. Different strategies may be useful. The first one might just be one vocabulary word in one sentence, or 2 or 3 or even 5 words in one sentence. The idea here is students who do one word, they can go up more frequently and get points. But if you want to spend more time and think about a sentence and try to get, more points each time you go up, you could do 4 or 5 words. So the teacher puts the team numbers up on the board, and he or she is tallying as they come up. So for example, you can see the student come up to the teacher reads it, really only for content. Now, I really caution teachers not to give too much grammatical feedback during an activity because they're really rushing. They're trying to get those points. They aren't really listening to feedback. So really just see if they've used the word in context or incorrectly. And then if they have recurring grammar points, maybe just blurt it once. But the idea is really don't correct the whole thing for them. They then go back to their seat, write another sentence, and teams are coming up. But what I like is teachers can have instant assessment again. As the teachers are reading these sentences, they'll see over and over which words the students are having trouble with. After that game's over, that's when the teacher will go and teach those words to the class again, reteach it, because those are the words they're having trouble with. All right. Next is pick a card. Pick a card is a really great activity too because it works again like race for sentences on extending sentences with more and more vocabulary words. However, pick a card is a little bit more difficult because they have to randomly select them. I mean, you could always, as the easiest option, put them all up on the board. They then come, pick the word they know, pick the 2 words they know, and put them in the same sentence. Or you could have someone else pick a word for another team. And there are a lot of ways you can pick a card, but what I like to do is have it a stack, and then students will pick a card. Now, I want to go back to race for sentences again and then pick a card, obviously. These are great multi-level vocabulary games because as long as you're working with your vocabulary list, it really doesn't matter what words the other students are working with. So for example, if I'm a beginning level student, I go to my beginning stack of cards and I pull the words that I randomly pick. I then need to make a sentence with that. But I can still be making sentences, earning points for my entire team. So pick a card is really great because they're extending it. So second round, 2 words in one sentence, 3 words in one sentence. By the time you get to 3 or 4, you really want the students to write that sentence up on the board because then you can go and correct the grammar in front of all the students. And because this isn't timed, it's not a race, students can then absorb your comments and feedback about grammar. So again, making sentences, using vocabulary, as well as writing and grammar feedback. These are all the things. And the only thing the teachers have to prepare are those stacks of flashcards. But again, remember Quizlet, you could just print it out and cut it out, and then you'll be done. All right, so pick a card. Carousel writing activity. This is one that's really fun for the students. My favorite way of playing this is actually using butcher paper. I put it up on the walls in the room, and I did this because it was my last period of the day. The students were really tired, maybe end of the school year, right? End of the school day. And so I wanted to get the students out of their seats. So I put butcher paper up all over the wall, put them in partners, gave them a word list. So the idea here is they are writing a story, but they're only writing one sentence and using the vocabulary, of course, in that sentence. So all the students and their partners start at a butcher paper. They are then looking at their word list and trying to write a word. Now to start this activity might be difficult because everyone has to start a story. So I like to work with the theme we're working on. So for example, if we go to Statue of Liberty, the idea of freedom, you can put the word freedom up on the board so everybody knows their stories are supposed to be about freedom. Or you could put an image of the Statue of Liberty or 3 images and say, I want the story to have something to do with all 3 of these images. But then it gives them a starting place to write the story. So the idea is you can time the rounds if you want to make sure they keep rotating, or you could just have people start to collect at a certain paper and then they'll feel the pressure to write faster. Or you could keep them in their seats and then they just move the paper around. Or you could keep the paper at a certain desk and move the students around. But the idea is they are rotating. So they write one sentence, they then rotate to the next one, they read that sentence, and then they write the next one. They then read the next 2, and then write. So they're constantly writing on all different stories. Now, timing for this game, I would say 20 to 30 minutes. You really do want them to at least get back to their original paper, or maybe pass it 2 or 3 times so that the story can develop. Another caution here, students really love to start to make fun of each other. If that's okay in your classroom, that's up to you. I was okay with it because they were all really united and friendly with each other, but it is a little dangerous as a teacher, especially when you're working with younger children. Carousel writing activity, after you're done, the teacher, I always recommend the teacher reads it, because sometimes if the students read it, it's very difficult to read everybody's writing. So when the teacher reads it, it's best to read with corrections, meaning you're reading it as if it was perfectly written. You don't want to read it incorrectly, so you're kind of correcting it while you're reading it out loud. In that way, they can really enjoy the essence of the story. All right. Writing. So again, carousel writing, but we also want vocabulary writing, sentence writing. So you can have them do sentence writing however way you want. Put those words in a story. Write a paragraph about a theme. So the theme is freedom. You need to write an expository paragraph about it using the vocabulary words. Or write a paragraph in response to a question. So what is one freedom you have? Use the vocabulary in that writing. This is really your best way to formally assess them. Can they use that vocabulary individually on their own? All right. And then talking about assessment, we really do believe in assessing students, of course. Spelling dictation is one of the most common ways to test vocabulary. We believe it's optional, because if you can spell a word, great, but nowadays you really don't need to, because there's spell check, there's dictionaries galore, but we do believe that you can do spelling dictation and then have them write the definition. But again, that goes back to memorization. We really want them to use it in context. There's matching, word and definition, fill in the blank sentences in a word bank. That's what we really believe in. We give students a sentence where there are blanks, 1 blank, 2 blank, 3 blanks, and then they need to, from a word bank, fill in that passage or that sentence. So you can do a themed passage. One of our teachers that uses eloquence really enjoys doing what you see here on this slide. He uses different fake words as the blanks instead of blanks, and in that way students read it, they think it's kind of funny, and then they have to find the correct word that goes in those blanks. And if you just want to, make sure the students know the words at the end of your test, you could always just do 1 or 2 words in one sentence. So we are almost out of time. I just wanted to let you know that that is an explicit flow of how we believe vocabulary should be taught. We really want it to be practiced, but definitely with preview, presentation, practice, writing, and assessment. So remember to always teach vocabulary in context and not just isolated word lists, and use different activities to practice the vocabulary with your students. So thank you for taking the time to join us. I hope this has been informative, and I'd love to hear back from teachers who have used some of these activities in their classrooms. We might use your comments to put on our blog, on our posts for Facebook, Twitter, social media. But if you have any questions or comments, please email me at brosas@thesysintl.com. And please join us next time for reading strategies and activities for ESL, ELL classrooms.